for 2017. So what have we got? We got yogis, we got hipsters, mermen, elves, other emojis to make the cut of gender inclusive emojis. You've got a breastfeeding emoji, and finally, Finley, the bearded man. We've all been waiting for. Do you when you tweet, Finley, or
tweet? What's that, Wallace? I just sat here and I just tweeted a completely, nothing.
Right.
Just because I wanted to send a tweet while I was live on air.
I know that you're
I
know you're a bit of a tweeter. Do you emojitize your language?
Not so much on Twitter, but I do use them on text. Yeah. But I love sending absolutely random ones that people haven't got a clue why I did, like I'm really fond of chickens and monkeys and stuff like that, but that have nothing to do with the tenor of what I'm saying. Yeah. So I do like them.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Highly unprofessional.
Totally.
Here's another Finley tweet.
That's if I'm not fast asleep being lazy, too lazy to tweet the Finley McDonald story.
I was just thinking because, are they the new hieroglyphics? Because there's a professor, I've read Michael Kobalis' professor in linguistics, his new book, The Truth About Language, extraordinary book.
Stop showing off.
You see, there you go. I read a book, Finley, okay? But look, he says that the formation of language arose from gesture. And I was just thinking emojis are kind of a symbolic form of gesture. Is language going back to gesture?
What a great thought. So like hieroglyphics. So
Totally.
We're going back in time.
Yeah.
Well, as we globalise, we are quite constrained by the fact that we have language, don't we? So that a lot of the world speaks English, but it may not be their first language. So maybe actually hieroglyphics and emojis is the new language, which means we can communicate across different language groups. Got an exciting thought, really.
Yeah, I think that digital communications and social media and the internet are probably universalising English to a really great extent. My kids,
Is that a good thing, do you think? Is that
I just think it's a thing.
It's a thing, yeah.
It's just a thing, we have to sort of adapt. We have to accept what's happening in a certain way. But it's interesting. At the same time, we're probably writing more than we used to.
Do you think?
Yeah, because everybody's emailing and texting and so on. So, we're actually using written language a lot. On the other hand, we're becoming a visual culture.
We're taking a lot more photographs than we ever did.
Photographs and video are what people really want to watch when they're online. So I don't know what the answer is at the moment, other than there are some missing emojis still.
Like?
I need one that signifies wry indifference. And I also need one...
Wry indifference.
Yeah. I think it's just an eyebrow, but I'm not sure quite what it's doing.
Well, actually, I have one for you because there is one with a slightly raised eyebrow.
Yes, that's
so
sceptical.
You've got it.
That's sceptical.
Yeah,
wry indifference is hard. And I also would like one that is for abject shame. Not guilt, like way beyond it, shame, like just self-loathing.
Any
and
emoji
shame.
that you like in your work of world vision?
Well, the one I love, the new one, is the curling emoji. And the reason I love it, a friend of mine tried to get to the Olympics. He realised he couldn't do it through another sport other than curling, and he made it and got to the Olympic Games.
Well, Finley McDonald, Chris Clark, I'd like to say it's a pleasure, but no, it has been a pleasure.
Same.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thanks, Ross.
See you next time.
Good everyone. Tonight, Floors and Statistics House in Wellington, a report suggests people could have died if the Kokoda quake had happened during the day. What are the implications? Building and Construction Minister Nick Smith joins us. New South Wales residents seek refuge in ceiling cavities and on their roofs as floodwaters peak at more than 6 metres. Extraordinary water in the north of the state. Northland schools at breaking point. The extraordinary behaviour of one violent child in one Northland school over a week. The Rodeo Code of Welfare, a call for all Robinson helicopters to be grounded, the Silver Fern's most capped captain, Casey Kopua, and Ashburton's plans to revive Chinatown. Yes, they had one, and they'd like it back. Join us after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. An inquiry into the failure of Statistics House in Wellington in the November quake has found a design flaw triggering urgent action. The government has ordered improvements to concrete design standards and is also looking at increasing its powers to force owners to check similar buildings. The highly flexible building moved more than expected in the earthquake, and 3 precast concrete floors came loose. The government statistician Liz McPherson had only just signed the lease on the building. She says she did not see an engineer's report prepared after the 2013 Seddon quake, and if she had, she would have done things differently.
If I had had that report, what I would have done is I would have taken independent advice from another structural engineer, and I would have made a decision based on that advice.
The head of Statistics New Zealand, Liz McPherson. The Children's Minister, Anne Tolley, says Oranga Tamariki, the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children, is not a rebranding exercise. Oranga Tamariki was created after a review by an expert advisory panel in 2015, which found the system was fragmented and lacked accountability. The agency takes over from Child, Youth and Family, which has been under review almost continuously since its inception in 1989 and has been restructured 14 times. And Tolley told those gathered at the launch there's no quick fix and today is only the starting point.
It will be a major shift away from a system that has responded to a crisis to one which will provide early support to keep families together and one which acknowledges and addresses the trauma suffered by children.
The Children's Minister, Anne Tolley. In New South Wales, the remnants of tropical cyclone Debbie have forced residents to seek refuge on their roofs to escape floodwaters. Rescue crews are struggling to get all of those trapped out, and emergency services fear some people may have been swept away. There were more than 280 calls for help overnight. 150 of those are still outstanding. Flood records have been broken at Wollumba, and torrential rain overnight and extreme winds have hampered rescue efforts. The State Emergency Service is waiting to rescue 2 of its own volunteers after a rescue boat was washed away in floodwater on the north coast. In Lismore, thousands of people have been evacuated as 2 major rivers rise rapidly, topping the town's levee for the first time since it was built 12 years ago. The police say human error and miscommunication were to blame for a man being left in a court cell for 48 hours. The man was put in a windowless holding cell at the Masterton District Court on a Saturday in January and forgotten about. Adriana Webber reports.
The man had been granted bail and was put in the cell while paperwork was being filled out, but he was left there and wasn't discovered until Monday morning. The police investigated and have found human error and a lack of clear communication were responsible. The Wairarapa area commander says the police staff involved regret the error and acknowledge the distress it caused the man. Inspector Donna Howard says the way he was treated fell below the standards of service expected of the police, and they have put more robust procedures in place to ensure it doesn't happen again. She says she has met with the man to apologise. This is Adriana Webber.
The Prime Minister says he's confident security agencies could deal with any risk posed by Mark Taylor if he returns to New Zealand. The United States has named the 43-year-old, originally from Hamilton, as a global terrorist, meaning he poses a significant risk of committing a terrorist act against that country. He's believed to be in Syria fighting with Islamic State militants. Bill English says if Mark Taylor tries to return to New Zealand, security authorities will assess his risk at the time. He says he can't say how many other New Zealanders could be fighting in Syria.
I'd be surprised if someone could return home having been radicalised without New Zealand finding out appropriately about that at some stage. But yeah, it is possible that there's Kiwis, people with New Zealand citizenship in that situation.
Bill English. It's 5 past 5. To sport, and the former Silver Ferns captain Casey Kopua believes she's leaving the team in capable hands. Kopua played the last of her 101 tests for New Zealand in 2015 before taking extended leave and having a baby. She's now decided not to make herself available for international duties. The 31-year-old is New Zealand's most capped captain, having led the Silver Ferns in 77 tests. Kopua says the next breed of Silver Ferns are more than capable of competing with Australia and believes the new national premiership competition will bring out the best of New Zealand's talent.
It is quite cool for New Zealand to own their own competition and have their own games. When it was like that, New Zealand were actually winning more games against Australia when we were separate.
Casey Kopua. High winds brought a premature end to the first round of the first women's golf major of the year, the ANA Inspiration in California. World number one and defending champion Lydia Ko was just 5 holes into her round. She's 2 under so far, 3 shots back from the leader. The first round will resume early tomorrow morning. Australian Nick Kyrgios has booked a semi-final showdown with an informed Roger Federer at the Miami Tennis Open after both players won today's quarter-final clashes. And the All Black halfback Aaron Smith will play his 100th Super Rugby match tonight when the Highlanders host the Melbourne Rebels in Dunedin. The match kicks off at 7:35. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, things are up in the air with the organisers of next month's Balloon Festival in Wairarapa. Hopefully we'll get through. Country Life meets a couple of farmers helping to clean up Canterbury's Selwyn River. We have a mixtape from the former Radio with Pictures frontman Barry Jenkin. You might know him as Dr. Rock. And we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to libraries and what you do with the things you find inside them. On Nights, Well Read with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with showers from afternoon. Western areas from Auckland down to Wellington, including Coromandel and the Central High Country, fine but some cloudy periods. A few areas of morning fog from Taupō northwards tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine but a few areas of morning fog. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with variable high cloud. Low cloud about coastal Canterbury tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Butler and Westland, cloud increasing, drizzle developing in southern Westland today, then spreading elsewhere tomorrow before turning to rain in Westland late tomorrow. Fiordland, rain, heavy at times. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy, rain at times about Southland and Clutha, and a few spots elsewhere, clearing most places tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, drizzle at times. It's coming up to 5:08. You're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Coming up tonight, Debbie's torrential hangover as the floodwaters spread south. They get deeper, over 6 metres in some places. Unbelievable. The behaviour log of a child in Northland who seems to desperately need help. But is he about to get less rather than more? And who knew? Maybe you, but if you didn't, there used to be a genuine and rather special Chinatown in Ashburton, and are hoping to bring it back. But we begin in Wellington with Statistics House and what its failings mean for similar buildings throughout the country. This is an important story because, as we know so terribly from Christchurch, structural and planning failings can cost lives. Now, Statistics House didn't collapse, but if we read from the report released this afternoon, and these are all quotes, there was significant building deformation and structural damage. The north and south end frame beams have elongated and there's permanent frame dilation at both ends of the buildings. Precast floor units have lost their support, units have dropped onto the furniture below them, and there's been significant and widespread cracking to the floors. In other words, this is serious. Nick Smith is Minister for Building and Construction. What does he think of what the report says?
Well, it identifies a flaw in quite a specific type of building design, concrete framed, precast floor slabs, multi-bays, but its performance in the Kaikoura earthquake was unacceptable. It would be likely to have caused serious injury or fatality had the quake been at a time when working hours and the building was occupied. It is true that the Kaikoura earthquake was a big mama. It was an earthquake we'd only expect in Wellington every 50 or 100 years. It was unusually long, but we need to learn the lessons for the design code from this building's lack of performance, change the code and ensure that future buildings are better designed. It's a harsh reminder that our seismologists and structural engineers do not fully understand and have 100% protection against earthquakes. It's about every time a big quake comes along, whether it be Christchurch or Kaikoura, that we learn every lesson possible and further improve the code.
Absolutely, and I think everyone would agree with that, but we agreed with it when your equivalent was saying it in the 70s and 80s, right? And we were learning lessons then, and we redesigned code, and we re-looked at the way we were building buildings, and we are still learning. And I just wonder, at what stage are we going to be able to say to people in Wellington, this really is as good as it can get?
Well, my view is that not in our lifetime will we be able to provide a 100% guarantee of building safety, given the sort of energy release and power that's involved with earthquakes. You know, the Kaikoura earthquake involved a release of energy the equivalent of 800 Hiroshima atomic bombs. These are phenomenal forces. We are a lot safer than what we were with Napier. We're safer again as a consequence of a Nangahu and each earthquake that occurs, but we cannot provide the public with a guarantee of safety, and it will be years of ongoing research in response to quakes of this sort.
Absolutely. All of that is true. And in fact, it just stands to reason. Of course there is going to be an earthquake too big, simply too big. But in this report, and you have referred to it, there are flaws and vulnerabilities that can and arguably should have been avoided.
Well, at the time this building was constructed in 2005, this deficiency was not known about. It has subsequently been found out, and that's why we're making changes to the code. If we compare our seismic design standards internationally, I've got confidence that we're at the cutting edge. There is a particular factor in Wellington with these unusual effects referred to as basin geological effects, where the amplification of the seismic shaking occurs. We are working with our partners in Japan and California on better understanding those, but we still do not fully understand earthquakes to be able to include those in our code at this stage,
absolutely.
and that is why this is an ongoing area of improvement and research.
Okay, let's talk to the ongoing nature of this. What do we know now as a result of this report, as a result of what happened at Statistics House, and how is that going to be implemented? How quickly and how many buildings?
Well, we know from the preliminary report that came out last year that there are about 800 buildings that have some of the same features as Statistics House. We've worked with the Wellington Council, 80 of those buildings, and working through those. The preliminary reports from engineers is only a small number of those have the common features that would require remedial work. Now, outside of Wellington, we do not have the powers to compel building owners to undertake further investigations. That is why in the follow-up to this investigation, I'm asking the Ministry to look at legal review of my Building Act powers. We are asking engineering professionals and councils to look at buildings that have some of these features. But I want to stress, John, these particular features do not pose the greatest risk by any stretch.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It's loose masonry on old buildings. We know that.
They're the ones that
absolutely. But I want to talk about
that's where we need to focus our efforts.
Absolutely, but we're talking about Statistics House and similar buildings here, and I want to talk about what you're saying. Are you saying in the Wellington region there are 80 buildings that have similar design features?
Some of the design features.
Okay, and what about outside?
Following up on that.
Right, and the Wellington region's big. We're not just talking the CBD, we're talking right up, right? How far north are we talking?
Well, the specific earthquake legislation we passed just gives us powers in that area where there are follow-up risks of aftershocks from the Kaikoura quake.
Okay, what about outside of Wellington? What about, for example, in Christchurch? In other words, what do we know about these buildings? Because if we look at the beam elongation, if we look at the precast floor units, you know, this is quite common design, isn't it, over the past 10, 15, 20 years?
But for a building to have all of the features that Wellington had was unusual, a very long earthquake, and an earthquake with the amplification effects, I am satisfied that this is not one of the larger risks. Yes, we need to prudently follow up on it, but it is not the major issue that we need to focus on improving the earthquake safety of New Zealand's building stock. What we do need to do, though, is make sure that we learn from Statistics House in the building standard so that the new buildings that are being built in Christchurch, the building boom that's occurring in Auckland and elsewhere, have take on board what went wrong with Statistics House.
Building and Construction Minister Nick Smith talking to us shortly before we came on air. It's 5:15 exactly. Thank you for being with us on a Friday night on Checkpoint. Let's go to northern New South Wales now, where tropical low Debbie has wreaked havoc. Flood records have been broken in some parts of the very north of the state, where floodwaters reached more than 6.5 metres at its peak this morning, forcing many residents to seek refuge in the ceiling cavities of their homes or on their roofs. Rescue crews fear some people may have been swept away. That hasn't been confirmed. Sirens sounded early this morning in Lismore, signalling for residents to leave immediately as a torrent of water rushed through the centre of the town. Floodwaters have stopped Lismore's levee for the first time. Have topped Lismore's levee for the first time since it was built 12 years ago. And in Queensland, thousands of people have been evacuated as two major rivers rise rapidly. In other words, Debbie is no longer a cyclone, but she's doing real damage. The ABC's Lucy Carter reports.
There was nothing Lismore residents could do this morning except watch as water gushed over their levee wall and into the CBD.
Look at that. That's full on, eh?
The town's flood levee, which was built in 2004, had never been tested like this. At 4 a.m, an alarm sounded throughout Lismore. The Wilsons River was too high. The levee had failed.
That levee is nearly at the same level as this.
Lismore resident Bruce was awake and filming on his mobile phone as the city streets began to fill with water.
Just streaming into the city from the Wilsons River. The levee bank is about 1.5 blocks to my right. An extraordinary amount of water flowing right to left into the city.
Peter Hannigan is a beef and macadamia farmer from Namalgai, just north of Lismore.
The creeks are as high as I've ever seen them, and water went places that we've never seen before out this way. And yeah, like you wouldn't believe, the roads, fences, everything's gone, down the main waterways. It has been a little bit. Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of significant damage, to be quite honest with you, on the farms.
The SES has made well over 150 floodwater rescues in the region so far. Spokeswoman Kayleen Jones is very concerned they haven't been able to reach everyone.
So we have people that we're aware of who had sought shelter and refuge in the ceiling cavities of their homes and indeed on the roofs. Some people potentially have been washed downstream, and there's a potential that some of those flood rescues may indeed result in tragedies.
Yvain needed SES help to escape her home in the Chindera caravan park on the Tweed River near Tweed Heads. She was shocked at how fast the water rose around her.
It just came out of nowhere. We had a high tide last night. It wasn't too bad, but this morning it just kept rolling. Last time it flooded here, it didn't come through my place, but today it's just gone straight through. I've got water all through the annex. I've probably lost most of my furniture, my freezer, my washing machine. I've got no insurance, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
The Tweed River has also inundated the town of Murwillumbah. Hydrologist Justin Robinson says there aren't many people alive who have seen this much water in the area.
We've estimated that to be around about 6.2 metres at Murwillumbah. Around 4:30 this morning that peaked, and that's actually higher than the record flood in 1954, which was 6.05 metres, and higher than the 74 flood event, which was 5.8 metres. So obviously a very serious flood situation.
In Queensland, deluges of almost 800 mils fell on some parts of the Gold Coast hinterland overnight, with that surge now making its way through townships on lower ground. Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk wants people to take heed.
There are flood warnings out for some of our rivers. We've got 3 major flood warnings and 4 moderate flood warnings. So Cyclone Debbie and the aftermath may have passed and left Queensland. However, what we are dealing with is large amounts of rainfall.
Queensland Police Commissioner Ian Stewart is also urging people in affected areas to pay attention to emergency warnings.
The northern Gold Coast area has experienced similar levels of flooding. Floodwaters are approaching, and they are putting out SMS alerts to people in those areas. They are asking people to go to higher ground. They're urgent alerts, and we'd ask the community to take them seriously. As the Premier said, this emergency is not over yet, and we are dealing with flooding.
That's Queensland Police Commissioner Ian Stewart ending that report from the ABC's Lucy Carter. Lou Sinclair opened her fair trade shop, Kindred Collective, in Murwillumbah just a year ago. Located under her Queenslander-style home, she had many thousands of dollars of stock from all around the world, stock which wasn't insured against flooding. And she had poured her heart and finances into starting her clothing, jewellery and home decor store, and this flooding was a disaster.
I just couldn't believe how quick it started coming in all of a sudden. It was a lot quicker than, people had warned us and said that it does happen very quickly. Whereabouts our shop and our house is situated, it comes in from both sides. So we've got like an open street where it comes, I don't know, what do you call it, just goes straight through and from one street to another. So we've literally got the levee and the river on one side of, at the end of one end of the street, and at the other end we have the old highway, and it just comes in from both ends, and I could see where the water was just coming up from both ends and meeting, and I just couldn't believe it. 1 minute we're just in water, below our knees, and then the next minute I suppose we were so busy trying to get everything done and running up and down the stairs, and before I knew it I couldn't believe it was up to my neck, and then we just turned all the lights off in the shop, so it made it even harder, and then next all the furniture in there just started toppling over, and we were just climbing on top trying to get all the jewellery, and I just couldn't believe how quick it happened.
On the screen as you speak, we have a photo of you, and the water is up to your neck. Yeah. Your neck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm how tall am I, do you think, hon? I'm about 5'9", 5'10" in height, and I was literally not even on my toes. I had my shoe that was obviously longer than my foot, and I was literally on the tippy toe of my shoe just to keep my neck above there, and my daughter was just treading water to try and get a photograph of it. Yeah. So, and that was the end of it. Basically, that was when I just went, there's nothing more I can do, because I was still trying to get stuff out. And my husband and my daughter's boyfriend came down and said, look, that's it now. But I still just kept trying to get stuff out. I still thought I could save things.
So are you not? So you've got obviously property insurance, right? But you don't have stock insurance. Is that the case?
No, we don't have stock insurance. No, yeah, that's correct. So we have the house that's insured. Yeah, home and contents insurance that is only for the house. But we don't have it for the shop, because obviously having insurance for when you're in a flood zone area, you get quotes anywhere between $3,000 and maybe $12,000 a year. It's just so surreal to me. I just even now look out and like my daughter said, all the times when we've watched the news and we see these people sitting on their roofs and we see what people have gone through, and she said, I can't believe that that's actually now us, and I can't believe that myself.
Lou Sinclair talking about her fair trade shop, Kindred Collective in Murwillumbah. She opened it just a year ago. She did not have flood insurance for its contents. It's coming up to 23 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Some breaking news now. An outbreak of typhoid has resulted in 10 people being hospitalised in Auckland. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says it's tracing people who've been in contact with the confirmed cases and is following usual protocols to control the spread of the disease. Typhoid is spread primarily through water and food, but can be spread person to person. Basic hand washing is one of the best ways of protecting yourself. Symptoms of typhoid include a high fever developing over several days, headaches, general weakness and muscle aches. Stomach pain and constipation are also common, but some people get diarrhea. Typhoid is potentially fatal, but it can be treated with antibiotics. An outbreak of typhoid has resulted in 10 people being hospitalised in Auckland. Coming up on the program, the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children officially opens its doors, but what will they do inside? And Northern schools at breaking point, the extraordinary behaviour log of one violent child in one Northern school over a week. Where is the funding to support him and the school he's in? And how Ashburton has plans to revive Chinatown. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, of course, where you can watch us too. You can watch us on Freeview Channel 50. And our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. A Northland principal says New Zealand has a clear choice of investing in help for violent children in schools or investing in more prisons 10 years down the track. Pat Newman, who heads the Northland Principals Federation, says teachers are at breaking point as they try to cope with growing numbers of damaged kids. And he's on the verge of advising them to start suspending these children to keep others safe. Some have been abused at home, he says, but increasingly schools are dealing with children damaged before birth by alcohol or methamphetamine. Mr. Newman says these children have behavioural problems that not only disrupt classes but threaten the safety of their classmates and their teachers. They need full-time minders, he says, but on average they get funding for teacher aides for 2 hours a day per child. Our Northern reporter Lois Williams asked Pat Newman exactly what he's dealing with in his school, and he produced a behaviour log for one boy who's already been expelled once by another school. His behaviour is in fact improving, he says. But here's what he got up to in the past week or two.
All right, so let's go through the log. It starts off with offences listed as verbal violence and physical violence. What did he do?
The verbal violence is the threats of hitting, the threats of that, the best Anglo-Saxon vocabulary you would ever heard.
This is to the other children or to the teacher?
Children, teachers, paraprofessional. About the only one he doesn't do it to is me.
So in the first instance, he pushes somebody down the stairs.
Yep. Him and his boy don't see eye to eye, and that boy is another boy with high need, and he hid till the kid was coming up the stairs, jumped out, and then pushed him and then took off.
And the kid went down the stairs?
Yeah, luckily not too far.
So he wasn't badly hurt?
No, but could have been. The potential is huge, and this was actually going into school in the morning before he clicked into the paraprofessionals.
Okay, so this is before he even gets into the classroom?
Yes.
And his next action is to pick up a chair and throw at the same boy?
Yes, that is an irregular. There's another one there where he came in and tried to strangle that same boy. I think he is in there with pulling him off the chair, etc.
Yes, it says the boy was seated on a high stool at a table, and this boy came in through the glass doors and grabbed him around the body and tried to pull him backwards onto the floor. This didn't work, so he put his arm around the boy's neck and pulled him backwards, and he fell backwards on the stool and landed, hitting his back and head on the floor. That sounds pretty serious.
They are. And what's worse, if you put it into the context that it happened in a matter of 30 seconds. The boy was in one of the new spare rooms, felt that the boy was looking at him, and therefore because he was looking at him he was saying nasty things about him when he wasn't, and that was his reaction.
It says that he then hit him in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
How do the other kids react when this sort of thing happens?
Our children, we have about 400 kids at school, and we're talking about 10 kids, all right? And we work under the one rule that we look after each other, and our children know that children are different, all right? And so they do have understanding about it. But they are also always having to keep the eye out that they're not ones catching getting caught up in the harangues.
So that must be quite a stressful thing for them.
Yes, it is. It's more stressful for the teachers.
Where was the teacher aide when these particular attacks happened?
Well, with that boy, we can't have a teacher aide on the whole time. He's not one of our worst ones. The teacher aide shared between that boy and another boy.
So she wasn't on the spot when this happened,
No.
as you say, very quickly.
Yep.
Now, the third incident in this log, and bearing in mind this is in the space of just a week or so,
Yep.
The same boy got angry and he threatened to get scissors and went upstairs to get them. What was he going to do?
Well, if you're threatening to get the scissors and you race up the stairs to get them, obviously you're thinking of using them and not to cut paper. Luckily, when he went into the room, there was a teacher in the room, and he didn't get the scissors.
There have been cases in the past, though, where children have stabbed other children in class, haven't there?
In other schools, I'm well aware of it. There's one quite recently where one of the other schools has had to pick up a child that's been expelled for doing that in a different school, and there I think they get 2 hours a day to coverage.
Lois Williams talking to Northland Principal Pat Newman. We would love your feedback on this. Oranga Tamariki, the new Ministry for Vulnerable Children, has officially opened its doors, marking the end of the beleaguered child, youth and family. The creation of the new ministry has been controversial, with accusations it could take Māori away from whānau, that it lacks resources and staff, and of course criticism over its name. Our political reporter May Heron was at the launch today of the 15th redo of SIF in the 28 years since the agency was formed.
With moko painted on their faces, poi at their hips and feathers in their hair, children from Wellington's Te Aro School kicked off the official event. The Children's Minister, Anne Tolley, insists this isn't a rebranding exercise.
We've started out as we mean to continue, with children and young people at the absolute centre of everything we do.
Oranga Tamariki was created following a review by an expert advisory panel in 2015, which found the system was fragmented and lacked accountability. Child, Youth and Family has been under review almost continuously since its inception in 1989 and has been restructured 14 times. But this latest overhaul is its biggest yet. Anne Tolley says there is no quick fix, and today is only the starting point.
It will be a major shift away from a system that has responded to a crisis, to one which will provide early support to keep families together, and one which acknowledges and addresses the trauma suffered by children.
The ministry has had its fair share of criticism. Earlier this month, the minister was forced to go back to the drawing board after pushback from Māori around a part of legislation which puts safety above the priority of placing a child with a member of their family or wider hapu. Concerns also remain around money, resources, and that the ministry is too narrowly focused. John Tamahiri from the Urban Māori Authority, Te Whānau or Waipareira, is convinced the only thing that has changed is the name.
Just to rename it the Vulnerable Children's Agency and reflag it seems a bit trite in regard to its systemic and deeply embedded poor management, particularly out of the Ministry of Social Development, one of the worst performing ministries we have.
The Child Poverty Action Group's Mike O'Brien says there's been little thought to the process.
It does seem as if the whole thing has been really quickly rushed through to get a piece of legislation and a new ministry in place, and that seems to be driven by political agendas as much as anything else.
However, the Prime Minister, Bill English, says the key to this ministry's success is keeping children and young people's voices strong throughout. He laid down this challenge to the ministry's Youth Advisory Panel.
I think it's pretty important you understand that part of your job is to upset us. Well, I will know it's working if I hear complaints about how assertive you are about what you're saying. Because government's a big machine, it can kind of, even for politicians, it can kind of crowd you in a bit. So don't let that happen, will you?
From tomorrow, the legislation as part of the overhaul will come into effect, including the creation of a new independent youth advocacy service, Voice, Whakaranga Mai, and the ability to keep children in state care until they turn 18. There is more legislation still to make its way through Parliament. From Parliament, ko May Heron, tēnei.
Thank you, May. 27 minutes to 6. Coming up on Checkpoint, does the rodeo code of welfare reflect best practice? We look at it. And the father of a pilot killed when a Robinson R44 helicopter crashed in 2014 says the choppers should be grounded until they've been redesigned. Plus, Nona with business. But first, Katrina with the headlines.
10 people have been hospitalised following an outbreak of typhoid in Auckland. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service is tracing people who've been in contact with the confirmed cases, and it says it's following its usual protocols to control the spread of the disease. Typhoid is potentially fatal, but can be treated with antibiotics. Auckland's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Sinclair, says typhoid is spread primarily through water and food, but can be spread from person to person. An inquiry into the failure of Statistics House in Wellington in the November quake has found a design flaw triggering urgent action. The highly flexible building moved more than expected in the earthquake, and 3 precast concrete floors came loose. The government has ordered improvements to concrete design standards and is also looking at increasing its powers to force owners to check similar buildings. Oranga Tamariki, the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, was launched today, replacing Child, Youth and Family. The new ministry was created after a 2015 review found the agency was fragmented and lacked accountability. The Children's Minister, Anne Tolley, told those gathered at the launch there's no quick fix and today is only the starting point. Tens of thousands of people have been evacuated from towns in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland as unprecedented flooding from torrential rain continues. Residents of
Murwillumbah, matey.
Australians area have taken refuge in the ceiling cavities and on the roofs of their houses as emergency services struggle to dispatch boats due to safety risks. I did practice that before I came. The police say human error and miscommunication were to blame for a man being left in a windowless court cell for 48 hours. The man has been granted bail at the Masterton District Court on a Saturday in January and was put in the cell while paperwork was being filled out, but he was left there and not discovered until Monday morning. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you, Katrina. Turning to business news now with Nona Peltier, who is sitting beside me in the Auckland studio. A couple of confidence surveys released today, Nona, suggesting business and employees have less confidence about the economy.
Yes.
Yep. Why?
Well, partly because we're getting at that stage where people have been enjoying this, growth in the economy for a while, so it's maturing. And that always gives people pause to think, doesn't it? I mean, once you've had a bit of success, you're thinking, well, can this continue? So for businesses, they look at the economic outlook, the economic position, and they say, well, we got geopolitical risk, we got an election coming up, so we're a little less positive about the economy. But when it comes to our own outlook, no, we're pretty positive about that. And that is the most important indicator.
So, sorry, forgive me. So there are two surveys here, or two questions in the survey. One is the big picture question about the economy and where that's heading, and the other is the micro picture about us as individuals.
That's right.
How we're feeling.
Exactly.
Right.
So they're feeling less confident about the construction sector and agricultural sector because we've seen that little bit of dip in dairy prices over the past few weeks. But they're happier about exports and investment. And interestingly, they're a little less enthusiastic about employee hiring. So they're a little bit not sure about hiring more staff. And that's reflected in another survey we got today. So this business confidence survey is the ANZ survey. The other survey is from Westpac, and it's an employee survey. And in that situation, it looks like employees are a little less confident about their outlook. And so that eased off an 8-year high. So that's like...
So the employers aren't confident they're going to take people on. The employers have already got the message, and they are lowering their expectations accordingly.
You would think. But overall... even, the ANZ Bank chief economist Cameron Bagri says that, we're still tracking to 3.5% to 4% annual growth, economic growth. He doesn't think we're going to get there, though, unless there's more productivity out of workers. And on the employment survey...
Yeah, but the poor old workers, they're saying to their employers, show me the money.
Yeah, well, that's right. And on the other side, the economist at Westpac, Satish Ranshad, who prepared that survey, he's saying, that what we're seeing is really sort of a paring back of exuberance. So I don't know how many workers are particularly exuberant about the situation, but apparently that might be the case. But again, we're going back to this geopolitical risk, and that's creating some uncertainty. So maybe it is that in election years, or when Donald Trump is the president, we're going to see this kind of activity. Don't know. Interesting, though, eh?
Yeah, fascinating.
Considering we're still pretty well booming along.
I'd love to see the sample sizes and how rigorous. I'm going to come and talk to you about those surveys after the program.
All right, I'll be at my desk waiting at 7 o'clock on Friday. Yeah, I'll be there. Maybe not.
You're taking the piss, Nona.
Maybe you are. Anyway, the NZX Top 50 Index. Well, actually, if you want these quarterly numbers, ended up the quarter 4.6% from where it started this year. And so today we added 28 points, almost 0.4% to 7,197. And in the currency, well, I have to say the U.S. currency, the dollar hardly moved over the last few months against the U.S. currency. In the end, it finished up where it sort of started the year at 69.8 U.S. cents, 91.3 Australian, and 55.9.
Lorna Peltier, our Auckland business reporter, thank you so much. Get those servos out.
I'll be on to it right away.
Shortly.
That's my priority.
Earlier this year, we brought you footage of electric prodders being used on calves at a rodeo near Whangarei in the north. The ministry is still investigating that footage and is yet to decide whether to prosecute. But Checkpoint has since obtained an internal government memo that raises questions about how rodeo legislation works. A senior animal welfare investigator at the Ministry for Primary Industries wrote in 2015 that if the Rodeo Code of Welfare didn't exist, rodeos would be problematic and prosecutable legally under the Animal Welfare Act. And a top animal welfare lawyer has expressed concern the Rodeo Code of Welfare may not reflect best practice. Here's Zach Fleming with more.
At the National Rodeo Championship last weekend in Wairoa, a calf lays still after being tied up during a calf roping event. Animal behaviourist Elsa Flint says it's not struggling because it's given up.
They go into what we call learned helplessness, which is a state that animals go into when they're essentially overpowered. They can't see any way out, so they're really distressed. They've tried to run, they've tried to fight, they can't.
More video shows a horse standing still in an open chute with a cowboy on its back. It needs encouragement to buck. The cowboy uses metal spurs on his boots to kick the horse, and the flank strap on the horse is tightened. Elsa Flint believes both things cause the horse distress.
So it's not as if the horse is saying, oh, yay, let's go out there and see if we can buck this rider off. It's not the way they view it. They view it, oh, my God, I've got to get away from this. The horse is certainly not having a pleasant experience. And you can see when they stop that the nostrils are flaring, the mouth's a bit open, they're really quite distressed.
However, it's important to note that nothing in that footage is considered mistreatment. The cowboys are complying with the Rodeo Code of Welfare, which, updated in 2014, recognises that rodeos involve situations where animals are subjected to a risk of injuries and distress. Members of the Rodeo Cowboys Association did not wish to comment. The association has instead hired a public relations firm run by Michael Laws. Mr. Laws, acting as spokesperson, said Miss Flint is biased and the association doesn't have a personal view on rodeos, but reiterated it complies with its legal obligations.
Because all the practices that are associated with rodeo have been independently, scientifically verified, investigated and condoned by Parliament. Now, if Parliament at one stage wants to change its views, we'll actually have that discussion and that debate, and we'll abide by what they come by. But at the moment, we're happy with the way things are. We think they represent the best practice.
But regardless, breaching the Rodeo Code of Welfare isn't actually a prosecutable offence. In fact, in an internal memo obtained under the Official Information Act, a Ministry for Primary Industries senior animal welfare investigator described the Rodeo Code of Welfare as a shield that can protect people facing prosecution. The welfare investigator continues, explaining they believe the code statutorily reduces how the Animal Welfare Act impacts rodeos, and that rodeos might be problematic and prosecutable if the Rodeo Code didn't exist. MPI refused repeated requests for an interview, but in a statement said that the Rodeo Code doesn't protect people who breach the Animal Welfare Act in any way, and it works with the Act to protect animals. The Veterinary Association wants the Rodeo Code reviewed. It was last updated in 2014 and has to be every 10 years. Animal welfare lawyer Ian Robertson says it may not currently reflect best practice.
It's a sliding scale. Our ideas and concepts and what we consider acceptable in terms of animal treatment change with time. There might be certain practices or events that good practice and scientific knowledge would say perhaps it's timely that we review those. But actually there has been criticism that the codes themselves, while a great concept and obviously important, there's been criticism that actually they're not keeping up.
Several animal welfare organisations, including the SPCA and SAFE, have gone further and called for complete bans. But the Minister for Primary Industries, Nathan Guy, and the Prime Minister, Bill English, have both ruled that out. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
A New Zealander fighting in Syria with Islamic State has been put on a global terrorism list by the United States. Mark John Taylor, who hails from Hamilton, was named as a specially designated global terrorist by the US government because they say he poses a significant risk of committing a terror attack. The 43-year-old is now believed to be in Syria. He faces sanctions and a possible target on his back. Our reporter Jesse Chang has more.
My name is Bilal. I have been Muslim for 8 years. I was born in New Zealand and I love Islam.
That's Mark John Taylor declaring his devotion to the Islamic State in a 2010 video on YouTube. The US says he has been using social media to encourage terrorist attacks in New Zealand and Australia, including appearing in a 2015 propaganda video. The State Department says the 43-year-old is thought to be in Raqqa, Syria, where he has been fighting for ISIS since 2014. A foreign policy expert says Mr. Taylor's life is now at risk, and anyone associated with him is also in danger. Otago University Professor Robert Patman says there's a very real possibility the US government will now hunt Mr. Taylor down.
I think that the Americans are signalling to New Zealand that as the anti-ISIS campaign ramps up against ISIS, that Mr. Taylor will certainly be on the list of targets.
However, a former army friend of Mr. Taylor says he doesn't think the Hamilton man is a danger to anyone. Logan Bartlett, who now lives in Scotland, met him 20 years ago when they were both based at the artillery headquarters in Waioru. He says Mr. Taylor was a kind person.
I would have described him as fairly harmless, probably lost. He was a nice guy. He was a super nice guy. And I don't think he has it in him to do anything particularly dangerous. I think he's just fallen in with the wrong crowd.
Bill English says he can't confirm whether the government would hand over Mr. Taylor to the US if he tried to come back to New Zealand. The Prime Minister says the government would need to understand all the implications of giving him up, but he's confident New Zealand security forces are able to handle any risk posed by Mr. Taylor. He confirmed that up to 5 other New Zealanders are operating in Syria, and he says he hasn't ruled out working with them to gain information about ISIS if they surrender.
If there's behaviour that looks like it's going to be risky primarily to New Zealand citizens, then you'd expect our border and security agencies to be appropriately getting the information they need to deal with that threat.
Mark John Taylor's name first came to prominence in 2011 when WikiLeaks named him as someone who had visited Yemen and had links to Al-Qaeda. At the time, the then Prime Minister John Key said he was aware of Mr. Taylor, who was living in Hamilton under a number of restrictions, but that the public had nothing to fear from him. For Checkpoint, Ko Jesse Chang Aho.
The father of the pilot killed when a Robinson R44 helicopter crashed in Kahurangi National Park in 2014 says the choppers shouldn't be used in New Zealand until they've been redesigned. David Webster's comments follow a Transport Accident Investigation Commission's report into the accident which killed his son Damien 3 years ago. Eric Frickberg reports.
In its report, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission found Damien Webster was killed when one of the rotor blades of his R44 helicopter sliced into the cabin. It says that caused the main rotor to detach from the aircraft, and it landed 100 metres from the rest of the wreckage. The Commission blamed this catastrophe on so-called mast bump, in which a loss of G-force caused by things like a sudden downdraft can cause rotor blades to cut into an aircraft's body. Since 1991, there have been 18 people killed in 14 mast-bumping accidents involving Robinson helicopters. David Webster says these stem from a serious design flaw in the helicopter, and he has a challenge to the chopper's manufacturers.
Why don't they take the thing up to 3,000 feet or whatever, where there's plenty of open air, put it in a low-G situation and recover it? They don't, because the helicopter responds so rapidly that it destroys itself. The blades go through the canopy, killing the pilot, and the aircraft tumbles to the ground in bits.
David Webster says he wants the authorities here to push for redesign of the aircraft, and until that happens, they shouldn't be used here.
What I want to support is pushing back to CAA, back to FAA in the States, and in turn back to Robinson. the commercial pressure is going to be one that Robinson will understand because it will hurt their pockets.
In its report, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission's Manager of Air Investigations, Peter Williams, found that all Robinson helicopters, R22, R44 and R66, are susceptible to mast bumping in low-G conditions, and preventive measures should apply to all of them.
The flight characteristics of the three models are similar under those conditions, and limitations should be applicable to pilots regardless of their operating experience on the helicopters, because pilots of a wide range of experience have had these accidents.
Speaking from the Robinson Helicopter Company's base in California, its president Kurt Robinson rejects any suggestion that the aircraft are unsafe, and he says the inexperience of the pilot might have been a factor in this crash.
I think that pilot was doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, unfortunately. TAIC suggests somehow that there may have been conditions or something that just no pilot, no matter what the experience level, could have survived, and we don't agree with that at all.
Damien's father agrees that his son mightn't have been a highly experienced pilot, but he insists that doesn't let Robinson off the hook.
It's possible that more experience may have assisted him. However, that doesn't alleviate their responsibility for producing an aircraft, which under certain circumstances, it's uncontrollable, and it gets into a low G situation and develops into mast bumping. It's unrecoverable.
Kurt Robinson says R44 helicopters have been flying in trying conditions for the past 20 years. But Damien's father David says the problem with events like his son's accident is that it's often very hard to piece together just what happened after the event.
When people die, as my son did, there's no way of knowing if he responded correctly or not. There is no way of knowing what happened because the aircraft self-destructs and takes the life with it. So no one can actually say that it is a safe, recoverable manoeuvre.
In New Zealand, Robinsons have already been dropped by the Ministry of Primary Industries and the Department of Conservation, while the National Rural Fire Authority strongly advises that they not be used. For Checkpoint, Ko Eric Frickberg Tene.
9 minutes to 6. The discovery of 2 Hector's dolphins washed up at beaches in the South Island have raised questions again over whether enough is being done to protect the endangered species. The Ministry for Primary Industry says both dolphins could have died due to human interference. The ministry is investigating. Conan Young reports.
One dolphin was found 7 weeks ago on a greymouth beach and the other last Sunday on the other side of the South Island near Banks Peninsula. Neither death was reported to authorities as required by law. MPI manager Gary Orr says he doesn't want to compromise the investigation by saying too much about how the dolphins died, but he says it's rare to find them washed up.
As with most things that die in the ocean, there are a number of other species out there that predate on dead fish and dead mammals. So it's particularly important when they do wash ashore that they are reported to us so that we can learn from why it died.
MPI is now interviewing everyone known to have been fishing in the area at the time the mammals are thought to have died. Gary Orr says while only 2 Hector's dolphins have been reported as being killed by commercial fishers in the past year, it's thought the true number may be as high as 77.
It's always a concern that there is underreporting, yes, and the ministry is taking steps to implement monitoring programs, particularly for commercial vessels, that may help us identify mortalities in the future.
MPI says there are around 15,000 Hector's dolphins, twice as many as previously thought. But Otago University dolphin expert Professor Elizabeth Slutin says this figure is misleading, and on the west coast, where one of the dead mammals was found, the population has fallen 20% in the past 16 years.
We had done an analysis on how many dolphins are being caught and what we expect to happen with these separate populations, and we predicted it would drop by 1,000, but not until 2050. And so that drop has occurred, but much, much faster than we would have predicted.
Elizabeth Slutin says MPI is also underestimating how many Hector's dolphins die in nets each year. She cites a NIWA study showing up to 150 die this way each year, nearly double MPI's figure.
That's the problem at the moment, is that there's very, very poor information, even on the number of dolphins caught in gill nets and the number of dolphins caught in trawl nets. Basically all we have is a yes answer. We know that they get caught in trawl nets, but there's been so little observer coverage on trawlers that there is no way of estimating how many.
Elizabeth Sluton says pods of up to 60 hectares dolphins at a time have been seen following trawl nets in New Zealand waters, attracted by the prospect of an easy meal.
So it really is like, a child playing in the traffic. There's been some very good research done on this in Australia with bottlenose dolphins, where they put cameras in the nets. And I have some footage of bottlenose dolphins swimming in and out of trawl nets and spending quite some time in those nets. So fish that have been caught in the net, they pick them out.
MPI believes the chances are low of finding out who killed the two dolphins, but says it's important to establish how they died to prevent it from happening in future. For Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
We travel now to Ashburton, an hour or so south of Christchurch, where plans are afoot to breathe new life into a Chinatown which was once the largest communal Chinese settlement in the entire South Island. The Chinese community in Ashburton dates back a century when 8 men immigrated from Toisan district in China. Over the years, the site on the outskirts of Ashburton grew to a thriving community of around 90 people at its peak, which included shops, market gardens and a communal cooking area. The buildings are now in a state of disrepair, but the council and residents plan to change that. Our reporter Rachel Graham went to take a look around with the son of one of the original inhabitants.
This is a cooking area. This is a community house in called Central. There's a fireplace there. This one here, that's the office where all the uncles do the weekly here. There's a gambling table here. Mahjong, in the weekend, there's mahjong cards and funtan and all sort of, can't help it, it's just life.
Yip Ning's father was one of the original 8 Chinese immigrants who came to the Ashburton site, along with his 4 brothers and 3 cousins. By the 1950s, the area included a fruit shop, commercial laundry, rice storerooms, market gardens and a schoolroom.
And this is usually a Chinese school as well. I was here for a short while until one of our teachers, he moved.
So you used to have your classes in here?
Yeah, a little bit of Chinese.
Mr Ning says it was the largest communal Chinese settlement in the South Island.
Every Sunday we have a community dinner. Everything's, where the money comes from, the gambling money. Everybody, the winner have to put in some money for...
Sunday meal.
Yeah, but they have 15% for upkeep. That's how it works, you see.
One of the best preserved elements of the site is a traditional pig pit oven, which is brick-lined and has a pulley system to lower the pig into it. In 2014, the oven was restored, and it's now the only functional Chinese pig pit oven in Australasia. The simple wooden buildings have now been abandoned and are in a state of disrepair, but 6 years ago the surviving family members arranged for the site to be managed by the Ashburton Council to preserve its future. Ashburton councillor Lane Brahm says the council is still developing plans for the site, but it has formed a working party to get the project going.
My idea, and I think, but it's only my idea, but I think the council thinks the same. It will be really nice as a park, with some of the buildings restored or maintained. The pig oven being the main thing. I can see a square around here with Chinese elms and walkways out of it, going, connecting, because that fence can go down, it goes to the next subdivision. So it's part of a bike and walk area through Ashburton.
Mr Brahm says the council doesn't want to create anything too elaborate because it will be expensive to maintain, but it does want to honour the important role Chinese immigrants have played in the area for the last century. For Checkpoint, ko Rachel Graham tēnei.
Absolutely beautiful. If you're watching that piece, you'll have seen it, but some of the wood, very simple structures, absolutely glorious. I really do hope that happens in Ashburton. Who knew? I didn't, that was part of Ashburton's history. Lovely stuff. After the news at 6, we've got quite a lot actually. We're going to go back across the ditch to Lismore and that part of northern New South Wales. We spoke to the mayor just before we came on air tonight. He describes right through large areas of northern New South Wales flooding in excess of 3 metres still. Now that's depth. In other words, way above the height of most homes. Extraordinary. Kelvin, our brilliant director, has just put some pictures up, and it's over hundreds of square kilometres, this kind of flooding. So we're going to go back and speak to the mayor of the region after 6 o'clock. We're also going to look at the Senate in the United States. Cybersecurity experts levelled some bombshell accusations against Russia at a US Senate panel hearing. They told the Senate Intelligence Committee that Russian interference in US politics did not end with the presidential election. In fact, it is still happening right now. We will look at that after 6 o'clock. And an email about the buildings in Wellington, which we began with tonight, our interview with Nick Smith. Colin Wilson from Lower Hutt, lovely to hear from you, Colin, said, I spent 17 years in the Merchant Navy, during which time I went through many nasty storms. When you are on a ship hurtling through thunderous seas at 25 knots, slamming into 50-foot waves, you know all about quaking and shaking. Unlike an earthquake storm, storms at sea don't last for a minute or two, but for hour after hour. Ships suffer little or no damage under these conditions. So why do buildings collapse? Don't tell me that it would be too expensive to build a shoreside building to the same standard as a ship. All the ships I worked on were built to make money, and they sure did a lot of it. I used to say that I didn't think too much of modern architectural design, but at least the engineering was good. I won't even say that these days. How come the old buildings around Wellington seem to have suffered a lot less damage than the flash new ones? The old public library, for example, did not suffer damage, but the new one, designed by a trendy gee-whiz architect, was closed due to structural defects. The old town hall seems to be okay, but the flash modern building alongside of it may have to be demolished. To quote Pauline Hanson, and we don't often do that on this show, please explain.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A medical officer of health says the 10 people hospitalised in Auckland with typhoid include children and adults. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says it's managing an outbreak of typhoid that's developed over the last 10 days or so. The medical officer of health, David Sinclair, says those in hospital are quite unwell.
These are people who have been admitted to hospital because of their symptoms are quite severe, and quite a large proportion of people who develop typhoid fever do get admitted to hospital for antibiotic care, antibiotic treatment and assessment.
David Sinclair says the patients are from a range of places in central and southern parts of Auckland. Most of the typhoid that New Zealand gets is imported from people coming back into the country from either with symptoms or as carriers, mainly from the Pacific or Southeast Asia. The building ministers calling for buildings similar to Wellington's earthquake-damaged statistics house to be checked for a serious design flaw. A concrete floor support fell in the 7.8 magnitude earthquake last November. An inquiry released today found the design met industry standards at the time, but this was not enough to prevent the concrete beams that held up the floors from failing. The Minister, Nick Smith, has asked officials to look at law changes to provide greater powers to force building owners to follow up such design problems.
We need to learn the lessons for the design code from this building's lack of performance, change the code and ensure that future buildings are better designed.
Nick Smith, the owner Centreport, says it will make a decision on the building's future once it has reports from its engineers and insurers. After almost 30 years, the beleaguered Child, Youth and Family has been folded into Oranga Tamariki, the Ministry for Vulnerable Children. The new ministry was created after a review by an expert advisory panel in 2015, which found the system was fragmented and lacked accountability. Here's our political reporter May Heron.
The agency takes over from Child, Youth and Family, which has been through reviews and restructures almost continuously since it began in 1989. Oranga Tamariki has been years in the making and has been accused of taking Māori away from whānau, a lack of resources and staff, and even having a narrow-minded name. But the Children's Minister, Anne Tolley, told those gathered at the launch there is no quick fix, and today is only the starting point. She insists this is not a rebranding exercise and the ministry will shift away from a system that responds to a crisis to one that intervenes early to help keep families together. From Parliament, May Heron.
A Northland principal says New Zealand has a clear choice of investing in help for violent children in schools or investing in more prisons in 10 years' time. Pat Newman, who heads the Northland Principals Federation, says schools will have to start suspending some pupils because they're not funded to keep them and others safe. He He says he has 10 children in his school who need full-time one-on-one supervision, but they're funded at most for 2 hours a day.
These children that we have in the schools have a right to an education, and they have a right to be able to learn, and they have a right to get the counselling and all the rest of it that they need, so that we're not sending them off to NAFA in 10 years' time at $150,000 a year.
Pat Newman says in the past 2 weeks, one child at his school has pushed another downstairs, tried to strangle him and caused him to hit his head on the floor by pulling him off a stool. The remnants of tropical cyclone Debbie have forced New South Wales residents to seek refuge on their roofs to escape floodwaters, while there are fears some people may have been swept away. Rescue crews are struggling to get to all of those trapped, and in one case a rescue crew was left stranded when their boat was swept away. Lismore in the north of New South Wales is in chaos with floodwaters flowing through the CBD. Ruby Cornish reports from the ABC's helicopter.
From the air, the scale of the flood's devastation is clear to see. Lismore has been transformed into a vast lake of muddy water, and water is cascading over the city's failing levee wall. Both the Lismore and Murwillumbah airports are underwater, and across both towns, homes, businesses and vehicles have been abandoned. This afternoon, residents on bicycles and in kayaks are investigating the vast amount of damage this record-breaking flood has inflicted on their town.
Ruby Cornish reporting. Israel has announced that it's to build the first new settlement in the occupied West Bank in more than 20 years. The settlement near the Palestinian city of Nablus has been approved at a meeting of Israel's Security Cabinet. Palestinian officials have condemned the decision. It's 6:05. To sport, the New Zealand all-rounder Grant Elliott has confirmed his retirement from international cricket after signing a deal to play in England's 2020 competition. Elliott famously smashed a six off South African paceman Dale Steyn to put the Black Caps into their maiden World Cup final in 2015. The 38-year-old retired from one-day internationals a year ago and played his last T20 for the Black Caps around the same time. The Highlanders halfback Aaron Smith says it will be a special occasion playing his 100th Super Rugby game at home in front of his family and friends. The All Black will reach the milestone in tonight's match with the Melbourne Rebels in Dunedin. Smith, who relocated from Manawatu to play for the Southerners, says there's no place he'd rather be.
I got a few of my best friends coming down, which would be nice. You know, there was a few calls on that and which game it could be or wasn't going to be. But it's just really special, and as I've said, I've made a home here now, and I love this place.
Aaron Smith. The match kicks off at 7:35. Meanwhile, the Crusaders have shuffled a few All Blacks for Sunday's clash with the Waratahs in Sydney, with Joe Moody replacing Wyatt Crockett at prop, while Scott Barrett moves from blindside to lock, pushing Luke Romano to the reserves. Olympian Lauren Boyle has withdrawn from next week's New Zealand Swimming Championships due to an ongoing hip injury. However, the New Zealand selectors have given a dispensation, allowing Boyle to be considered for selection for July's World Championships. That's the news.
This week on Music 101, live sessions from local lads Lake South and the lovely Louis Baker.
Each and every day the desire.
We chat to Future Islands. We get the lowdown on tours from Hopetown Brown and John Toogood. We speak to the Kiwi Boys making new tunes with Jamaican reggae legends. And we go deep with Live in Colour before their New Zealand performance. All that and more, Music 101, Saturday from 1 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with showers from afternoon. Western areas from Auckland down to Wellington, including Coromandel and the Central High Country, fine, but some cloudy periods. A few areas of morning fog from Taupo northwards tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine, but a few areas of morning fog. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with variable high cloud. Low cloud about coastal Canterbury tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, cloud increasing, drizzle developing in southern Westland today, then spreading elsewhere tomorrow before turning to rain in Westland late tomorrow. Fiordland, rain, heavy at times. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy. Rain at times about Southland and Clutha and a few spots elsewhere, clearing most places tomorrow evening. The Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a drizzle at times. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. 10 people, including children, have been hospitalised after an outbreak of typhoid in Auckland. Health officials are unable to say how many more might be infected. This is just breaking this afternoon. Auckland Medical Officer of Health David Sinclair told our health correspondent Karen Brown typhoid can be deadly, and people with symptoms, and they're pretty recognisable, should be assessed by a doctor.
Typhoid can be a very serious illness, and a proportion of people may die from it, and certainly others will be very, very ill, often for several weeks. The main symptoms are fever, which develops over a few days, and headache, and muscle aches and pains, and tiredness. People often get constipation and abdominal pain as well.
Would you call 10 people a large outbreak?
Well, we don't know how many people it's going to be. This is underway, and certainly we're trying to control this, but certainly 10 is quite a large number to have over the last 10 days or so.
Any idea about how many others may be involved at this point?
We don't know that at this case. We are still in the process of contacting the relatives and family of those who've been affected. If there are people who have symptoms suggesting, we are saying they should go to their doctors to get assessed, and we have referred some people as well for assessment. Normally, we would say if people are food handlers or work in healthcare, we would ask them to stay at home until they've had their test results confirmed.
And some people are in that situation?
I'm not going to confirm that in this situation, but it's our normal process will be to do that.
Auckland Medical Officer of Health David Sinclair talking to Karen Brown, our health correspondent, about typhoid. 10 people, including children, have been hospitalised in Auckland after an outbreak of it. Let's go to New South Wales now with the time at 6:10 on Checkpoint, where tropical low Debbie has wreaked havoc, breaking flood records along the way. At its peak in the middle of the night, floodwaters reached more than 6.5 metres deep in some areas, forcing many residents to seek refuge in the ceiling cavities of their homes or on their roofs. One of the affected areas is Lismore. We'll hear more from Mayor Isaac Smith in a moment. But first, let's hear from resident Adrian Smith. Adrian spent the past 3 months building a 4-bedroom granny flat under his house. Today, the floodwaters just wiped it out. A short time ago, he told our producer Bridget Burke that despite not being insured and people trying to pinch his belongings, he's philosophical, and the floods, strangely, are a bit of a happy time.
We had the fire brigade came through yesterday and tried to evacuate everyone, but everyone just stayed. And woke up this morning and it was up around my waist. So all my hard work over the last 3 months is pretty well all ruined now. So it's all just gone, basically. The majority of my tools are underwater and my bed's floating. I went into my room and it was like 2 foot off the ceiling. So that's all right because it's keeping all my stuff dry on the bed. I just hope my bed doesn't sink. And so basically, no one can get to us at the moment. There's too much water. They could get to us by boat, but no one's in real distress at the moment. I think everyone just wants a cart and a beer.
The people around you, your neighbours, are they affected in a similar way?
Yeah, and then we've got people coming around trying to steal all our stuff, and so I've been having to tell a few people keep their fingers to themselves. You know, all our houses are getting destroyed. I'm not going to sit around and watch someone steal our stuff on top of it. As soon as the floodwaters come, everyone gets excited. Out comes the boards, out comes the jet skis. We sort of embrace it here.
So this has happened quite regularly for you?
Flood like this, I haven't seen one like this since 85, 86, roughly.
Is the atmosphere there almost joyful?
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's having a great time. We got the low from Debbie, Cyclone Debbie come down, and then there was another low pressure system that was sitting on top of us, and then the two met together. That's why we've copped it so bad. Yeah, we've lost everything, but, you know, we're all still alive, so that's the main thing. I did have a little cry, yeah, just to see all my work being destroyed, but there's lots of little green frogs getting around everywhere, and everyone's happy, so that's the main thing, I guess.
And have you got power?
No, it just went out like about an hour ago, 2 hours ago. A bit of luck, by tomorrow morning it'll be gone. That's if we don't get any more rain. It looks like it's going to rain though. It's forecast for no rain, but it's like we're going to get some more. Feels like it too.
Jeepers creepers, Debbie just keeps giving.
Yeah, then there's no in between either. We'll just have a massive dry period and then we just get this huge downpour of water and the ground just can't handle it.
Just before we came on air, I spoke to Lismore's Mayor, Isaac Smith, and as the interview unfolds, the water depths he tells us about really are staggering.
Look, we've been very fortunate. There's no rain falling here through the day now, but there is some light forecasted rain coming overnight. So we do have some concerns around that, but no, it was great to see the rain stop early this morning so we could get out and have a look at some of the water levels, which unfortunately are still rising and peaking right now.
Peaking right now, and is some of that tidal?
Look, we have a big tidal flow pushing water back up the river a little bit at the moment, but we're really peaking now at about 11.6 metres, which is very much a major flood and is putting metres of water through our CBD.
And it's busting the levee, right? The levee, which is built for big flood events, but nowhere near this big.
No, not this big. No, look, it can stop big floods. It can stop anything sort of around 1 or 10 in less. So we haven't had the levee seriously challenged since it was built 12 years ago, but this flood is more than half a metre over the top of that, and it's flowing right down in through the city.
And so the damage must be immense, is it?
Look, we're still assessing that. Obviously, a lot is underwater. The levee was built to overtop in a few specific locations, so we knew where it would overtop first. So we put measures in place to make sure that when it did, we funneled that water in ways that would cause less damage for the city. But at this stage, we know that it will be a big recovery bill. We just don't know how much.
And how big is the area that is seriously underwater? What are we talking about?
The Richmond-Wilson's flood basin is a very large floodplain, so we're talking hundreds of square kilometres. It's a very large area, and at the moment, it's a lot of water from the air when you watch.
Hundreds of square kilometres?
Yes, it's a big area.
And what sort of depths are we talking about at the most serious levels?
Well, the water level being 11.6 metres above the normal river height means we're already dealing with a large volume of water. But in our CBD alone, the depth around the businesses ranges from anywhere from as small as half a metre, but up to somewhere around 3 or possibly 3.5 to 4 metres. So those depths in residential areas are very dangerous and serious concerns are raised.
Holy moly, I'm staggered by that. You've got depths of over 3 metres in residential areas.
That's correct, yeah. So some of our lower parts in town, we have mostly commercial areas, but we have had to evacuate the caravan park, which is nearby. And of course, our biggest shopping centre is also not far away. So they've got a metre or so or more through their car park. Luckily, they're off the ground.
Luckily. Did you get the warnings that you needed? Because there was an evacuation done and a lot of people left. So you were told in advance it was going to be this bad.
Look, we did have a warning, but I guess more would have been good. I think the unprecedented rain levels really shocked a lot of people. So yesterday morning, on the Thursday morning, we were being told that some moderate flooding was possible.
Wow.
Within 2 hours of a moderate flood being issued, we had evacuation warning, basically. We were being told major flood, 500 to 600 millimetres had fallen in some areas of the catchment. So in 24 hours, that's an unprecedented amount of rain.
Sure is. Lismore's Mayor Isaac Smith, who spoke to us just before we came on air tonight. Terrorism, which is a very important difference. Terrorism insurance are two words we thankfully don't hear too often in New Zealand. But one of New Zealand's major insurers has recently changed its policy, clarifying it doesn't pay out when property, cars or houses are damaged in acts of terror. It says that's in line with the rest of the industry. We didn't know that. We wanted to find out more, and Emile Donovan has done so.
Most major insurance policies include a special clause precluding a payout in the event of a terrorist attack. This applies to houses, cars and contents insurance policies. Tim Grafton from the Insurance Council says the clause is to do with reinsurance companies.
These are the companies that operate globally and provide the insurance for insurance companies, and they look at global risk from terrorism, and they exclude that in their contracts with the insurers that they're insuring. So as a result of that, local insurers will have that as an exclusion in their house contents motor policies here in New Zealand.
He says it's been standard practice since the 9/11 attacks in the United States, but AMI Insurance, now owned by Australian conglomerate IAG, only brought in the policy late last year to apply to car and contents insurance. Tim Grafton says while that might seem odd, there's good reason for it.
Metropolitan centres where there's houses, motor vehicle contents and the like, you can imagine this plane might be hijacked and crashed into a suburb, and that would bring about a considerable loss. Reinsurers don't provide the cover for that loss.
Along with AMI, other insurers like State, Tower, AA and UE also don't pay out for acts of terror. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says insurance companies make their own decisions, and the move is not an indication the threat of a terrorist attack in New Zealand is rising.
Insurance companies make their own decisions about what they cover. It's pretty important, though, that the consumer understands what it is they're covering or not covering. We'll just continue to focus on what our level is, keep working with the border control and the intelligence systems to keep that level as low as possible.
And the reaction among some Wellingtonians was mixed.
Maybe it's because we're at the bottom of the world and we're not used to having terrorists.
It's not right, regardless of how the damage comes to your property, you're paying an insurance to cover it.
If my contents insurance in my car covers road accidents and fires and pile-ups, why shouldn't it cover an act of terrorism?
For Checkpoint, ko Emil Donovan tēnei.
6:19. Terrifying and completely perplexing. There's some of the descriptions parents are using to describe what it's like trying to protect their children from the proliferation of pornography online. Parents spoken to by RNZ's Insight program have come forward with striking stories of the harm they think is being done, as Tim Graham reports.
In the Hutt Valley north of Wellington, Lucy's family has had to confront the inadvertent viewing of hardcore porn.
We knew this family through an extracurricular activity, went to their place, just to hang out. The boys, same age, both 7. They just went off to play Minecraft on the iPad, and basically we got a phone call to let us know that the boys had come across some inappropriate content, basically that it was porn. And unfortunately we had no idea what our son had seen, just that it was porn. And also that apparently our son was really distraught and wanted the other boy to stop, but he continued to look at about 6 different videos maybe.
Lucy says her son needed psychotherapy to help him recover from the experience.
All we know is it was very traumatizing for him, and it completely skewed his idea of what intimacy was, and my partner and I just could not even embrace each other or give each other a kiss at the end of the day without our son running in between us, pushing us away, and even at some point saying, "I don't want you to hurt Mum."
Those who grew up in the first cohort of young people with access to online pornography are also trying to find their way. Woody was a regular porn user until a year ago. The 29-year-old has spoken openly to Insight about eradicating porn from his life altogether.
So my first interaction with pornography and the internet was actually at my dad's work. Curiosity got the best of me, so I googled the word sex, and then it just kind of spawned from there. I think I would have been 10 or 11, yeah. Once that curiosity kind of starts happening, you start diving in a little deeper, maybe accessing pornography a bit more. I think maybe pornography can give males and females ideas in their head that aren't always normal. It creates an idea in people's heads of how sex should be, in a certain way, or it depends what pornography kids are watching, to how they're growing up and to what they're learning is normal. So, yeah. I took it into my own hands. Sex kind of came a little bit numb to me. So, yeah, I cut pornography out of my life. And, yeah, it was a bit of an epiphany. I kind of compare it to smoking. Like, you don't need it, but you start to enjoy it, and you kind of brainwash yourself into thinking, well, this is okay. So I cut it out of my life. A lot of people don't believe me. I remember hearing somebody say that they were pornography free, and I was going, well, everybody watches porn, it's part of daily life. Yeah, and I mean, now that I've cut it out of my life, I kind of realise that you don't need it, and life can be better. So
Woody says people struggling with pornography should open up to friends and family to overcome it. For Checkpoint, Tim Graham.
And you can hear more about this on Insight, which is after the 8 o'clock news on Sunday morning on RNZ. 23 minutes past 6. Let's go to the US. Cybersecurity experts levelled some bombshell accusations against Russia at a US Senate panel hearing. They told the Senate Intelligence Committee that Russian interference in US politics did not end with the presidential election. It's still happening right now. The experts told the hearing that prominent US lawmakers have been targeted, including the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, and more. CNN's Jessica Schneider reports.
The Senate Intelligence Committee investigating the details of Russian meddling throughout the 2016 election.
Our community has been a target of Russian information warfare, propaganda, and cyber campaigns, and still is.
This is not fake news. This is actually what happened to us.
Ranking Democrat Mark Warner stressing the bipartisan aim of the process.
I want to make clear, at least for me, this information is not about whether you have a D or an R next to your name. It is not last fall's election. It is about clearly understanding and responding to this very real threat.
The first open hearing featured disclosures from experts on Russia and cybersecurity. They've deduced Russian interference may have been more wide-ranging than previously believed.
Russia's overt media outlets and covert trolls sought to sideline opponents on both sides of the political spectrum with adversarial views towards the Kremlin. They were in full swing during both the Republican and Democratic primary season and may have helped sink the hopes of candidates more hostile to Russian interests long before the field narrowed. Senator Rubio, in my opinion, you anecdotally suffered from these efforts.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio revealing for the first time attempted hacks of his staff occurred last July and again yesterday.
A second attempt was made, again, against former members of my presidential campaign team who had access to our internal information, again targeted from an IP address from an unknown location in Russia, and that effort was also unsuccessful.
Clint Watts, a senior fellow at a national security think tank, said during the campaign, Donald Trump repeated claims also pushed by Russian media.
He denies the intel from the United States about Russia. He claimed that the election could be rigged. That was the #1 theme pushed by RT, Sputnik News, white outlets all the way up until the election.
Senator Ron Wyden now urging the committee to call for President Trump's tax returns as part of the investigation.
The committee needs to follow the money wherever it leads.
Russia is also accused of launching an online smear attack against House Speaker Paul Ryan following the fallout from his failed health care plan.
This past week, we observed social media accounts discrediting Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, hoping to further foment unrest inside U.S. democratic institutions.
And one of the interesting takeaways from this hearing, the experts say that Russians seem to be winning in cyberspace because they have great propagandists and they have the best hackers out there. So in the testimony, those experts stressed, the U.S. government really needs to change its methods and work to attract top technical talent.
That report from CNN. We're going to end with some sport tonight. The Silver Ferns' most capped captain, Casey Kopua, formerly, of course, Casey Williams, is retiring from international netball. Kopua played the last of her 101 tests for New Zealand in 2015, so a couple of years ago before taking extended leave and having a baby. The 31-year-old returned to play for the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic in the ANZ Premiership this year, but has now announced she won't be available for the Silver Ferns. Kopua led the Silver Ferns in 77 tests. She competed at 3 World Cups, 2007, 11 and 15, and 3 Commonwealth Games where she won 2 gold medals, a formidable competitor. Our sports reporter Matt Chatterton spoke to Casey Kopua today about why she's decided to call time on her international career.
I guess it shows you what your life, can be without netball. But yeah, fully just thinking about the whole picture, not just netball.
Was it a tough decision? I imagine it was, but from your point of view, was it?
Yeah, it was. It was. It's not something that you can just make just like that. And I made sure that I spoke to, to Terry, my husband, and my parents, and just been picking people's brains about it. And then once I made the decision, everything just felt right. There's a weight off my shoulders, and it felt really good.
I guess from your point of view, do you feel like you're leaving the team in capable hands with sort of who we've got in the Silver Ferns lineup and even in the domestic competition, I guess, at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think Katrina and Maria have will do a great job, and they were there when I was there, so hopefully, things will carry on.
I talked to Maria, I guess, just before the start of the ANZ Premiership, and she said, she couldn't go through winning a silver medal again at a World Cup. That wasn't any motivation for you to carry on for another 2 years?
Yeah, well, that was one thing that was considered when making the decision. But if I carried on like that, I might be here forever to do that. But the World Cup is the only thing that I haven't won personally. So, but in saying that, I want to go back. I didn't want to go back if I wasn't the player or the person that I wanted to be.
And please don't take offence to this question, but was age a factor, I guess, also in your decision?
Yeah, it certainly was. Obviously, I'm not 17 anymore. Obviously, having Maya, it puts life in perspective and makes you realise or just think about life after netball and life with netball. And obviously, I'm 32 this year, so still got a few years left. But I don't think at that level, at the Silver Fern level.
Casey Kopua talking to Matt Chatterton. 77 tests for the Silver Ferns as captain, 101 tests for the Silver Ferns. Remarkable competitor, gave it her all the time. Speaking of which, can we take a shot at camera 5 shot? Camera 5. Now, if you're watching, you will see Kelvin has just waved. Blair, he's going to wave now. Blair's waving now. He's our sound dude. Kelvin is our brilliant director. And standing there with a check shirt, turn around and wave at the camera, Colin. Colin is a beautiful young Englishman who came to New Zealand on his OE and has been working here as an IT genius, just putting up with us all, saying, Colin, can you fix this? Anyways, continuing his OE, going off back into the world. And Colin, it's been a joy having you with us. You're a fine advertisement for the genre, young English people. We hope you travel well.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. 10 people have been hospitalised with typhoid in Auckland. The building minister wants buildings similar to Wellington's quake-damaged statistics house checked for design flaws. Child, Youth and Family has been replaced by Oranga Tamariki, the Ministry for Vulnerable Children. A Northland principal says New Zealand must choose between investing in help for violent children and investing in more prisons. Authorities fear people have been swept away in floodwaters spreading across Queensland and New South Wales. A major insurance company has added a clause to its car and contents policies so it doesn't have to pay out claims in the event of a terrorist attack. And the father of a pilot killed when a Robinson R44 helicopter crashed in Kahurangi National Park in 2014 wants it to be redesigned. Our next news and weather is at 7.
What if you were sick and got the wrong diagnosis?